simple blood test can be a strong indicator that a person can validate that you have Alzheimer's symptoms. And these tests are just rolling out. It's very important that people know about them. The fact that the treatment works best when it's begun as early as possible. So we want to educate folks to make them aware that they're entitled to this cognitive screening in their annual physical and that they should ask for it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really remarkably leading edge because before it was a 5 or 10 minute test and would be administered one on one when a person would ask you to draw a clock or remember 3 words or repeat a story. Now you're just handled a tablet. Can you imagine just given a little tablet like your iPad and 100 points of artificial intelligence are assessed in that 8 minute test?
Wow.
And it is more effective than the prior one-on-one tests. So this is a huge step forward, and AI is going to have many positive benefits for medicine, but it's already improving our ability to diagnose dementia.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to 45 Forward on Bold Brave TV. I'm your host, Ron Roel. As we kick off Alzheimer's and Brain Awareness Month, we're talking today with two passionate advocates, Jim Taylor, who's the CEO of Voices of Alzheimer's, and Carol Steinberg, who's a writer, nonprofit executive, and the author of a terrific intergenerational children's book for families with loved ones living with Alzheimer's. There's a lot to talk about on the topic of Alzheimer's, not just this month, but every month. There's an estimated 7 million Americans aged 65 and older living with Alzheimer's today, and that's an increase of about 300,000 cases from just a year ago. And there are about 12 million family caregivers who provide unpaid care, valued at more than $400 billion every year. On today's show, Jim and Carol will talk about a range of issues like the state of Alzheimer's research, the importance of early diagnosis, and the impact of Alzheimer's on young caregivers. They'll also share their personal stories and talk about the need for connection, education, and support all across America. So now let's meet our guests, Jim Taylor and Carol Eisenberg. Jim and Carol, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ron.
Thanks, Ron.
It's a pleasure having you guys. So there is a lot to talk about, but I wanted to just start with a few minutes with the two of you, about how you got involved with what you're doing today, because you both have interesting stories. My guests always have interesting stories. So I do want to spend a few minutes talking about how you got to where you are today and your advocacy and your passion for this. So Jim, I'll start with you, and then Carol, we'll segue to you.
Thank you, Ron. It's a pleasure to be here tonight, and thank you for inviting me to participate. I was a business person, IBM Finance, and had a successful career. My wife, Jerry, was initially a nurse and did some research and then got into hospital administration and finished her career as the CEO of the largest long-term care facility in New York City. She began to notice some cognitive issues late in her career, and it was a familial disease in her family. So she retired and in 2012, at the age of 69, was diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment, later clarified as Alzheimer's disease.
Mm-hmm.
We were both capable individuals and really we resolved early after her diagnosis that we wanted to make this chapter, the final chapter of Jerry's life, as meaningful as possible. Mm-hmm. So that we resolved that we would be very dedicated activists and do all we could to help not only ourselves, but other people learn as much about the disease and help equip them to have as positive a journey post-diagnosis as possible.
Okay, good. Yeah, and I will just say before I ask Carol that I did, for our audience's sake, that I heard Jim and Jerry several years ago. They gave a presentation on Long Island here, and it was very heartfelt and emotional. And I remember coming up to Jim afterwards and just shaking his hand and meeting Jerry too. So thank you for being here, Jim. Now,
thank you, Ron.
And then Carol, your story. Part of it, anyway.
First of all, thanks, Ron, for having me. So I was a longtime journalist, much like Ron. In fact, I
Hmm.
also covered Long Island for the New York Times for a long time. And I thought that career was going to continue. But then by chance, I was offered a job as director of communications at a Long Island Alzheimer's Foundation. And
Hmm.
it really piqued my interest because my dad had passed away as a result of Alzheimer's disease a few years earlier than that. And I just thought this is the time for a midlife career change. It was sort of, I guess, a meant to be.
Hmm.
And from the Long Island Alzheimer's Foundation, we created a national organization, and I was an executive at the national organization for more than a dozen years as EVP and then acting CEO. Worked for some other nonprofits and was lucky enough to come full circle and to meet Jim. And now I write the newsletter for Voices of Alzheimer's. I also recently published a children's book, as you mentioned up front. Thank you.
Hmm.
Come
Hmm.
Grandpa Meow, Let's Fly. And that book originated more than 25 years ago, the week my father died. I wrote the first draft, tweaked it over the years as I gained Alzheimer's expertise, and published it this year.
Terrific. Yeah, and I have a copy, and we'll show it on screen in a little while. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So let's start a little bit. Things there are big steps in Alzheimer's. They're happening all the time. People don't always learn about them because they're breaking news, but they're important. So why don't we start with some of that, and I'll go back to you, Jim, to offer us our audience a little bit of an update on what's been happening in terms of research and development and advances in treatments and so forth.
One of our challenges, Ron, actually is to help people be aware of why it's such an exciting time in Alzheimer's research. And it's really in multiple areas. It's ironic to me that a number of not just evolutionary, but revolutionary things are happening at the same time. And it's
Hmm.
really kind of a golden age, I believe, in Alzheimer's research, because for a century, since Alzheimer's was first identified, we have really had no effective treatment that would slow, prevent, or cure the disease. Most recently, over the last 3 years, disease modifying therapies for the first time have been approved for Alzheimer's. There are now two being marketed, one called Leqembi and the other is Kisunla. And these treatments are given by infusion, are intended for the early stage of the disease, which makes early detection very, very important because these drugs are most effective when they're started in the early stage.
Hmm.
And uh, there are the benefit is that it slows the progression in the early stage and can possibly add an additional year or two in the early stage of the disease, which is really when the patient is fully able to enjoy life and be a participating member of society to fullest extent. I know about these drugs personally because Jerry was on one of the first one to be approved, and we believe she benefited very significantly from being on the
Hmm.
drug.
Interesting.
There
Hmm.
are side effects. People may know that ARIA, ARIA, is the most well-known side effect, and it's asymptomatic, which means you aren't aware of the fact, and it's a swelling or some blood or liquid on the brain, and it's identified by an MRI. And as you begin to take the drug, you have MRIs periodically to determine if you might have the side effect. The side effects really are pretty much isolated to two small communities. It's gotten a lot of publicity, but
Hmm.
unless you're in one of these subgroups, you're probably at a low risk. Those two subgroups are uh, genetic. One is genetic if you have a particular gene and two copies of that gene. Only 2% of the general population are in that category. And then the other is if the patient is on anticoagulants. If you're not
Hmm.
in those groups, it's rare that you will have any side effects from the treatments. So that's very exciting for us. Of course, it's just a
Hmm.
beginning.
Right.
We haven't stopped, we haven't reversed, we haven't prevented the disease, but now there are additional drugs that are looking at other uh, causes of the disease, and we hope
Hmm.
that we're toward a combination therapy, what the AIDS folks called cocktails, when you mix drugs or take drugs.
Hmm.
And we hope for great benefits, and hopefully those breakthroughs will be coming soon. At the same time, remarkably, you may have seen just last week, Ron, the FDA approved the first disease, blood biomarker.
Hmm.
So that
Hmm.
a
Yes.
simple blood test can be a strong indicator that a person can validate that you have Alzheimer's symptoms. And these tests are just rolling out. It's very important that people know about them. And they're not for everybody. They've only been approved right now for people who have shown some signs of cognitive impairment. The
Right.
other really remarkable thing that's happened is uh, when we have our annual physical, Medicare annual physical for those old enough to be on Medicare, like myself, we're entitled to a cognitive screening. And that's become very, very important with these new treatments, and the fact that the treatment works best when it's begun as early as possible. So we want to educate folks to make them aware entitled to this cognitive screening in their annual physical and that they should ask for it.
Hmm.
And it's really remarkably leading edge because before it was a 5 or 10 minute test and would be administered one on one when a person would ask you to draw a clock or remember 3 words or
Right.
repeat a
Right.
story. Now you're just handled a tablet. Can you imagine just given a little tablet like your
Hmm.
iPad and 100 points of artificial intelligence are assessed in that 8 minute test,
Wow.
and it is more effective than the prior one-on-one tests. So this is a huge step forward, and AI is going to have many positive benefits for medicine, but it's already improving our ability to diagnose dementia. So we're very fortunate to have that already.
Yeah. Yeah. It's exciting. I mean, people are, concerned about AI, and of course there are lots of issues. But in the medical field, that's one of its ability to basically assimilate data is really dramatic, and in some ways,
Remarkable.
you're basically putting together 100 clinicians together and amassing what they know and doing an assessment. I
Exactly.
think it's fascinating work. Certainly, when I remember the old tests, right? They ask you questions like, well, what day of the week it is. I'm like,
Right.
I don't know what day of the week it is. Why is that a test of dementia? Um, but yeah, and so we have a couple minutes before the break, but I wanted to shift to Carol, and we can continue on the other side of the break. But just about, you mentioned, Jim, early onset issues, and I think early detection is a really important issue. And so I think when we come back from the break, Carol, I'd like you to talk about a little bit about your experience in your family and what happened when you initially. Well, I guess in the book, this was your father, or your grandfather.
My
That's
father.
my father, right? So you talk about your first experience and how, because there's the clinical side and then there's the emotional and personal side of it. So I'm going to just take a quick break now and not cut you off in the middle here of your story. But folks, we are going to take a short break. But when we come back, we'll be talking much more with Carol Steinberg and Jim Taylor. So don't go anywhere.
Are you caring for an aging loved one? It can feel overwhelming, but you don't have to do it alone. Ron's book, The Caregiving Navigator, is a step-by-step guide designed to help you plan, prepare, and provide compassionate care with confidence. From organizing family conversations to navigating long-term care and finding support for yourself, the caregiver, it's all here. Find the Caregiving Navigator now on Amazon and take the first step toward peace of mind.
Welcome back, folks. We're talking today with Carol Steinberg, a veteran writer, nonprofit executive, and author of a terrific children's book for families with loved ones living with Alzheimer's, and also Jim Taylor, the CEO of Voices of Alzheimer's. Before the break, we were talking about some of the developments in the field, some of the exciting developments in diagnosis and treatment. And I just wanted to have Carol pick up on some comments Jim made.
The fact that a blood test was approved, I think, has a lot of psychological meaning.
Mm-hmm.
I think people are aware of what blood tests are versus they might be scared when they hear initially that they need an MRI or a PET scan.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Yeah.
think that might really help with the importance of early diagnosis, as Jim mentioned. Also, in terms of education, which is so important, when I had my first Medicare annual wellness visit, I obviously knew that a cognitive assessment was part of it. And afterwards, I was talking to some friends about it, and they had absolutely no idea about it.
Hmm.
These were people, my contemporaries, no idea. Unfortunately, doctors are pressed for time. A lot of PCPs would rather the specialists take care of people with Alzheimer's disease or cognitive impairment. So it's really important to self advocate, to
Mm-hmm.
ask for these cognitive exams, especially if you have some concerns about your cognition.
Right, right. And so in your family, Jim, and you mentioned the importance of early diagnosis. I think that's for lots of reasons. One of them is that if you want to try some of these treatments, they generally are more effective with early diagnosis, not late stage Alzheimer's. So, talk about a little bit, give us a little bit more about your story about your dad and how that evolved into, your book.
So I think times were very different then. We're talking, my dad was diagnosed in the 1990s. We've
Mm-hmm.
certainly come a long way since then. There really was no effective treatment at the time. He really wasn't even put on medicine. It was more trying to manage behaviors, try to deal with other issues that arose. My mother was the primary caregiver. Myself and my siblings were long distance, so it really fell all on my mother's shoulders. I refer to her as a heroic caregiver because I cannot believe how selfless she was over so many years, doing most of it on her own until my father's condition deteriorated so badly, especially he couldn't walk anymore. He needed a wheelchair. So then she did hire an aide,
Mm-hmm.
but she still, I think, was representative of the caregivers we hear about today who don't recognize the self care they need. They don't recognize that they need respite. They don't recognize it's okay to ask for help. My mom was one of those people, whenever I mentioned, why don't you join a support group? No, no, no. I could do it all on my own. Finally,
Mm-hmm.
we convinced her. I recall like it was yesterday when she left my dad in the good hands of a caregiver and
Mm-hmm.
came up back to New York and visited with myself and my siblings and her five granddaughters at the time. And when I look back at the pictures of my mom surrounded by these Halloween pumpkins, it was the fall,
Mm-hmm.
she looked like a totally different person. She needed that refresh. And I think that's something that caregivers they need to allow themselves to have respite, to reach out for help. Getting back to my dad, it was a long distance. So I don't think we saw the progression, obviously, as much as my mom did. There were
Mm-hmm.
things that stood out. I remember once I went down there and he had shingles. He had shingles all over his body, and he
Wow.
couldn't express any kind of pain. And to me, that was heartbreaking. The book was written, as I said, the week my father passed away. As a journalist, I think it was my way of expressing grief.
Mm-hmm.
But it really was such a rough draft that over the years, as I gained experience with Alzheimer's organizations, I would continually go back to the book and tweak it here, tweak it there. The latest version added the intergenerational activities because I realized how important it is for families. And this is what my family didn't realize. You're told someone has Alzheimer's disease, you're told what some of the symptoms are, But as a family, especially a family with young children, which I had at the time,
Mm-hmm.
we need to answer the question, now what? How do
Right.
we interact with our loved one with the disease in a meaningful way, meaningful for the person with the disease to help with cognitive stimulation, to help them with quality of life, but also for the younger generation to teach them empathy, to show them that the connection is still there. This is still their grandpa or their dad or their uncle. So the book really grew out of a lot of regrets that we
Mm-hmm.
didn't know as a family at the time. And my hope is that it just provides understanding to intergenerational families, that it takes some of the fear and confusion out of the disease and helps people foster the bonds despite the disease.
Right. Right. Thank you for that. Yeah. Um, it's a terrific book. We'll talk more about that later about how people can get it. Now back to you, Jim. Now, so there are there is frequently it's a family dealing with an older loved one, but in your case too, it was your spouse, and it's also really it's a very different kind of relation. And my mom had Alzheimer's, but my dad was gone, um, and I don't know how he could have managed. That was also in the 1990s, Carol. So that was a while ago. But Jim, I do going back to the time I met you earlier, several years ago. You were with Jerry, and you were on stage, and it you talked about it, and you talk about connection and the authenticity of your relationship and the sense of dignity and destigmatizing this whole thing. And it's not that it was normalizing it, but for people to see you and see your wife together was really powerful.
Um, I miss having her on the show tonight. Um, Thank you for that very much. We had a partnership. We had a wonderful marriage. It was a wonderful marriage even before Jerry developed Alzheimer's or was
Hmm.
diagnosed. And our bond, given the work that we did and the cooperative partnership that we had, it was even a more bonding experience, and our relationship was even deeper. It was very important when we spoke, and we've spoken to, I think, 20,000, over 20,000 people over
Well,
the, and it was very much a 50-50 presentation for the first 8 years. And she would speak for 5 or 10 minutes, and then I would respond, and we'd move forward and tell our stories. At that time, was we didn't know nearly as much about the disease or about advocacy or about the political situation or research. So we talked mostly about ourselves, and exactly as you said, it was with the intent of destigmatizing or trying to address the stigma of living with the disease, that people could see it's a very, very slowly progressing disease, Ron, as you
hmm
know. And for 10 years, Jerry was, certainly the first 5 years, Jerry was very good, just forgetful. She was on one of these drugs. We believe that lengthened the time that she was so very good. She could travel, keep her calendar, pack her for herself. And she began then to decline. And I believe at the time you saw us, she was no longer, she could answer the questions, but she didn't want to speak. So after COVID, I did most of the presentation, but then
hmm
she was always on stage. We felt it was extremely important that the audience see Jerry and see the face and see the reactions and know that she was still very much a person. She was a living person. She would often say to me, people see me and think I'm not okay, or they
hmm
know with Alzheimer's. What they don't realize is I've chosen to be perfectly okay.
hmm
I'm different. I'm not the same as you and Carol and Ron. And that's why you all conclude I'm not okay. But I've decided I'm perfectly okay the way I am.
Right.
And that way I keep my self dignity, my self worth, and being proud of who I, Jerry Taylor, can be. So that was even as she progressed, uh, much of my day is Zoom meetings now with this new organization. And while she was still alive, she was always beside me for my meetings, even though she didn't participate and she didn't always understand. I thought it was so important that people continue to see, why are we doing this? It's not for
Right.
the association, it's not for the organization, it's for the patient and for the care partners.
Right. Yeah, I think that it was you, Jim, who mentioned that, there's several, interesting books these days that are personal stories about Alzheimer's. And I think one of them is mentioned by Rebecca Chop called Still Me, and I think that's an important statement. Um, and, and, and I think,
Thank you for mentioning it. Rebecca is a board member of Voices of Alzheimer's, a very close friend and a remarkable individual, and I highly recommend that book as well as Carol's.
right. Okay. Um, so let's talk a little bit about, how this, so it's important even when they can't speak to know the voices of Alzheimer's. And so that's literally how this organization started. It's Voices of Alzheimer's. And you were a founder, a co-founder with Jerry. And I think, Carol, you got involved with it as well. You might want to have comments. But Jim, talk about what the organization does, and Carol, chime in about your involvement in that and other organizations too.
Timing's everything, Ron. Like in real estate, it's location, location,
Right.
location. We just happened to organize and launch our new organization, Voices of Alzheimer's, which can be found on the web at voicesofad.com.
Okay.
As these new drugs got announced, Ron, there was difficulty in getting them approved by Medicare, CMS, and there, of course, any breakthrough drug is going to be expensive, and
Right.
very important that we get these covered. And Medicare has a long history of, I believe, discriminating against people with Alzheimer's.
hmm
Uh, and we could talk more about that, but I don't think it's
Yeah.
as relevant. Um, so there was a great need to hear the voice of the patient, because it's very effective when senators, when regulators, when decision makers actually can talk to Jerry or talk to Jim or talk to the members of our organization and know what the day-to-day lives are like and what the possibilities are that they can make by making a decision to cover the drugs in this case. So I was asked to start this organization. A very generous benefactor gave us
Mm.
funds to realize it. We've now grown significantly and are well funded. But our voice is important, and our goal is to raise the voice of the patient and make it easily accessible into the decisions that are being made about us. To pharmaceutical companies who are doing research, we're ready, available to them. But very much we want to be sure that Medicare hears from us, that the FDA, which approves drugs, hears from us. And more than that, we really try to do what benefits our clients as well. We don't have
hmm
support services generally, but we have been a factor in getting approval of a new airline program. There's a program called Sunflower, Ron, and it's
Mm.
prevalent in Europe. And if you wear the bearer of a lanyard, I forgot mine tonight, but it indicates that that person has a hidden disability. So in
hmm
Europe, all the airports and all the airline personnel have been trained to recognize that and to give that
Mm.
person, as if they were in a wheelchair, some extra time, some extra tender,
Interesting.
loving care, to offer to help them, to move them ahead in the line. So in the US, one of our board members traveled to Europe and realized what a wonderful program it is. And we've been trying to penetrate the US. All the
Mm.
major airports had adopted the program, but not the airlines. So we started a campaign to encourage the airlines to adopt the Sunflower program. And I'm very happy to say on May 1st, United Airlines is the
Mm.
first one to have trained all their personnel, their counter personnel, and their airline individuals to recognize the lanyard and to give that person support and help. And it's a wonderful program. So we're encouraging people to fly United whenever possible. at the same time encouraging all the other airlines to adopt the program. We're sure they will over time.
Right.
One of the other things that we've been concerned about, these drugs are expensive now.
Mm-hmm.
And we understand that. We'd like them to be more accessible cost-wise, but we also know that the developers must earn a good return after many, many failures in this research. But people who are early onset, what we call them young onset,
Mm-hmm.
more correct, are younger than 65. And in this country, if you're younger than 65, you do not have Medicare. And many of these people do not have insurance. And therefore, the SSDI, Social Security disability insurance,
Right.
requires a 2.5 year wait before you qualify for
Mm-hmm.
Medicare benefits. If you're hoping to get an early stage treatment, it's very important that you not wait, as we talked about how important early detection and those screenings were. So, one or two diseases have been legislatively exempted from this 2.5 year wait, ALS being one of them. So, we are about to introduce legislation in
Mm-hmm.
Washington that would also exempt young onset Alzheimer's from that 2.5 year wait to qualify for Medicare benefits, which would say that they would immediately be eligible or could pay for the treatments that they qualify for these new. It's a life changing, a life altering treatment.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
it gives the patient so much more hope. It's another. I know I'm dragging this out a little bit, but
Well,
and Carol knows this very well. Carol's such a wonderful reporter in talking to our members and patients that, when Jerry was diagnosed, there was no treatment. There was no really immediate hope of treatment. And so many people chose to be despondent, sit at home on the couch. And hope is so important, and attitude is so important. But now, with all these breakthroughs, there's much more justifiably a hopeful attitude that can be both by the care partner and the person with the disease. And
right.
we hope that this legislation, which we're very excited about, we've gotten a very positive response
Mm-hmm.
so far, and
Okay.
we're very hopeful this will pass this year.
Okay. Okay. So that's in Congress right now. So
Yes,
yes.
getting ready to be in Congress.
So it's still in committee though. Is that right, or is it?
No, it has not gotten to committee. We have to have the bill, what they call scored,
Right.
Ron, the cost calculated, and it's being costed right now, and we hope it'll be introduced next month.
Great. Okay. So we're going to take another break, and when we come back, I want to come back to you, Carol, because I know you've worked with Jim with Voices of Alzheimer's. You, like me, are a writer. You have lots of observations and insights. So I want to talk to you about them and how you contribute to Voices of Alzheimer's in your writing observations. So, folks, once again, we're going to take another quick break, but we will be back with much more. We have a lot to talk about still with Jim Taylor and Carol Steinberg. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Do you like what you're hearing? Well, we've got plenty more where that came from. Head over to 45forward.org, where you'll find a full archive of over 200 episodes of the 45 Forward podcast, all hosted by Ron. Each week, Ron talks with fascinating guests, experts, advocates, and everyday folks, sharing insights and stories to help you live a better, fuller life in your second half. We cover everything from health and caregiving to careers, relationships, and finding purpose, whatever helps you move forward with clarity and confidence. That's 45forward.org. Check it out and keep moving forward. 45 Forward.
Welcome back, folks. We're with 45 Forward on Bold Brave TV, again, talking with Jim Taylor and Carol Steinberg about a whole host of issues with respect to Alzheimer's. Before the break, we were talking about some of the issues involving getting early diagnosis and tests through Medicare. And I wanted to switch back to Carol because she's been involved with Voices of Alzheimer's as well. She's a writer like me, and she's got lots of observations. I believe you handle the newsletter. Is that right, Carol? Do I have that
Yes.
right? Yes. So talk.
Which
I'm
gives
so
me
so
the
you talk.
opportunity, sorry, Ron, but it gives
Yeah.
me the opportunity to talk to so many people with the
Right.
disease, many in the early stages, even people in the middle stages, and it gives me the opportunity to talk to a lot of care partners. But I do need to give kudos to Voices of Alzheimer's because I think what this organization does that makes them really sets them apart and really shows there was a need for it is they really do show the face of Alzheimer's disease by showing people's stories, by talking to people from all walks of life. We're not just putting celebrities out there. These are
Right.
people in all parts of the country who had to give up so much when they got a diagnosis, give up their jobs, spouses who gave up their jobs, children who have given up so much as a result of this. And Voices of Alzheimer's recognition of this, including with its Bill of Rights for people with the disease, which
Mm-hmm.
is a
Mm-hmm.
very, very powerful statement. And I do encourage people to look at it on the website because that really recognizes that we have to destigmatize the disease, that people need to be spoken to, they need to be recognized, that they're still a person. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember in my early calls with Jim, Jerry was there right beside him. Didn't really talk, but it was always that presence showing such a bond and such strong love. And I think that is such a good thing to show the world that there are selfless care partners out there. There's no denying it's a horrific disease, it's a challenging disease. It impacts every part of your life, financial, psychological, etc. But there are ways to push through it. And I think that's what Voices of Alzheimer's has shown to the world that there is hope.
Yeah, and I think there's hope, and it's part of life. It's not some siloed sector of our society. It really is part of every community, almost every family. I think years ago there was a little bit of a hesitancy, sort of a self stigma about people not wanting to bring it up, and people thinking, well, what am I going? How am I going to respond to that? And now you go to a gathering, and if this is your
Good to see
situation
you.
with a spouse or a loved one, it's like everyone has a story, and then you realize it's this is part of life, and it's an unfortunate, but it's you know yeah, Jim, go ahead. You want to jump in there?
No,
Go.
no, I was giving a thumbs up.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, it's um yeah, I think that we've talked about this in our other conversations, and I might as well jump into it, which is that the issue of caregiver burden. Yes, it is hard. It is hard. Um, Part of it, the reason it's hard is that we're not trained for it, right? I mean, we don't, so that's one of the things we need besides the destigmatization is the education, so people can understand the disease. I've been fortunate. After my mom passed away, I wanted to, knowing how difficult it was, I wanted to get involved in some way. And I was offered an opportunity to work with the Alzheimer's Association, my local chapter, to provide webinars for people, um,
Oh,
informational webinars. So one was sort of on the preventative side, reducing the risk. So one was called Healthy Living for Your Brain and Body, um, and it offered an opportunity for me to give back and making the journey a little less arduous for other families who are going through it. But also, you meet people in this community who are really extraordinary. I mean, you guys know there's a certain selflessness. You mentioned that word before, Carol, and I think that's true. That people and people come into it out of a sense of purpose, and many people are like you, Jim, and Carol. You come in because you're through accident, through personal connection, from totally different fields, and you feel a sense of purpose of, okay, let's do this,
Ron, I think you've hit on a very important point. I think the last 12 years of my life have been among the most personal growth, a period of
Mm-hmm.
such significant personal growth for me. When Jerry was diagnosed, we made a decision and we became passionate about advocacy and helping others. And I decided that I had been a success in my career, but I'd always kind of stayed in my comfort zone. I hadn't taken great risks, but I decided that I was going to live more on the edge, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
because I had a lot of opportunities that kind of came our way that normally I would have been more comfortable just to say, well, we're not ready to do that, or that's
Right.
outside of expertise. But I resolved we would not say no. And I believe that we all have a great tendency, everyone, to underestimate what we can achieve. If we
Mm-hmm.
find
Mm-hmm.
something about which we are passionate and decide to be courageous at the same time, it's just remarkable what we can do. Jerry and I never dreamed that we would become such visible and being able to make such an impact when we began. There was no course in Alzheimer's advocacy. We just had to learn, one step at a time. But because we were willing and passionate, and we met wonderful people. I mean, Carol's just an example of it's such a rich community because you bond so quickly because these people are passionate and there's no hiding. People
Mm-hmm.
are very open about where they are in life. So it's been an extremely rewarding journey.
Yeah.
A lot of the people that I talk to are also willing to jump in to advocate and for their own personal lives to really do more. They recognize, that there is an end. Unfortunately, this is a terminal
Mm-hmm.
disease. And so many of the people are so embracing life. And I hang up from these conversations and I'm like, wow. And Jim knows because I always talk about it with enthusiasm because it boggles my mind that someone could get a diagnosis like this and embrace life to such an extent and want to give back to this community in such an amazing way.
Yeah. And, one of the things that, that comes out from your book, Carol, I think is just thinking about caregivers in a broad sense, which is, so we usually think about older caregivers, in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and sometimes, older. But you bring up the fact that younger, people, younger children are getting more involved, maybe not as primary caregivers, but they're caregivers. And I think it's important that, well, I think that, in general, I think that not necessarily just for um, people with Alzheimer's, but caregivers of older people are younger these days. People are getting married later, and so they're having kids later, and so children and grandchildren are getting much more involved in the in the caregiving, and as you showed in your case, and so it's something that becomes a sort of a multi-generational enterprise between parents, their kids, and their grandparents. So I want to flesh that out a little bit more. Unfortunately, I need to sneak in one more break. So, folks, don't go away. We have a lot more in our final segment with Carol Steinberg and Jim Taylor. So, come right back.
Caring for a loved one can feel overwhelming. That's why we created CaregivingNav.com, your personal guide through the complex world of caregiving. It's a free, interactive website built around the Caregiving Navigator book, with tools designed to make your journey easier. Whether you're planning ahead, managing care right now, or navigating a crisis, you'll find step-by-step advice, trusted resources, and over a dozen downloadable checklists. From legal planning to home safety, from medical decisions to emotional support, it's all here, all in one place. Just visit caregivingnav.com because you're not alone on this path, and the help you need is just a click away.
Welcome back, folks. We have one more final segment with Jim Taylor, the CEO of Voices of Alzheimer's, and Carol Steinberg, a veteran writer and author of a celebrated children's book. And I wanted to talk about that book a little bit in our last segment. We had to sneak in a lot in our last piece here, but it's an important piece about the impact on young caregivers. So talk about that, because you were involved, but also your children.
That's one of the reasons why it's so important, the legislation that Voices of Alzheimer's is working on with early onset. Because if you think about it, we're talking about parents, most likely, under 55 years of age, people in their 40s, even in 50s, who potentially have young children who absolutely have no idea what this disease is about. There's such a lack of education about it. And they're most likely embarrassed because it's not like the older generation who know peers who are going through the same thing. They're isolated. The person in their classroom has no idea what they're going through. They haven't seen this in their family, or if they've seen it with an older person. So it's a very different situation, and they are called on quite often to help out with family responsibilities. So they miss out on some social opportunities, etc. But there is the plus side of being a young caregiver. There are studies that show that people who help care for someone with a disease like Alzheimer's or another disease do gain greater empathy. They do gain better social skills. They have increased self-confidence. And just think of the impact on the person with the disease, whether it's a parent or a grandparent, having a young person to interact with, to do some of the intergenerational activities like I have in my book. For the person with the disease, it stimulates them. It gives them the socialization they need, which is so important in terms of managing behaviors, in terms of increasing their quality of life, in terms of even normalizing the experience. So it's really a bonding experience for people to not only care for a person with the disease, but interact with them in social ways as well. My book, the intent is to really help children, as I said, learn about the disease in a very age-appropriate way, take away some of the fear, take away some of the confusion, but moreover, to really open up a conversation with a parent or a grandparent so that when the disease progresses, at least they have some background, they have some footing to build on and to talk more about the disease.
Right. And I'm thinking about what you were saying before, Jim, about, the sense of personal growth. So, that to me is important, that you realize that your relationship can continue to go forward with the person, and
Just in a different way.
in a different way. But it's not just, it is honoring what happened in the past, but it's not just about honoring what that person was. It's about who the person is now, and you grow with that person as you care for them.
I think it's also a matter of great respect.
Right.
That just because a person has the disease doesn't mean you can't respect them, doesn't mean you can't look them in the face when you're talking. There are so many things you could do to destigmatize, to give back respect to the person, and to help them live with the challenges that are going to keep going.
Right. Jim, pick up on that?
Some of the things you said a little earlier, I think I have told you before, I hate the term caregiver burden. Too often that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it is a difficult disease, but, I think it's a tragic disease for young onset that Carol was speaking of. But for older individuals, it's a very slowly progressing disease. The first 10 years of Jerry's illness were very manageable. It's only the late stage that I found really difficult. And in the 12 years total, I had great opportunity to become a kinder person a more thoughtful person.
Mm-hmm.
I learned patience. Um, I wish I had developed more of these skills when I was a parent or earlier in
Right.
life. I
Right.
my kids benefited and I would have benefited. So I really try to tell both caregivers and patients that you have a choice. Attitude is so important in determining how you will live this chapter of your life. And I think the attitude of the caregiver is extremely important because it very much affects the person they're taking care of. So choose to approach this as a positive, potentially positive experience. Of course, there are
Mm-hmm.
difficulties,
Right.
and the patient as well. My wife always, when she spoke, liked to talk about what the advantages or what she'd learned being an Alzheimer's patient. It was
Mm.
the sense that relationships were so much more important. It was very easy for her to be present because she didn't have a lot of other thoughts in her head, and
Right.
people interactions meant so much more to her.
Right.
So, and she would point out several of the things that she considered blessings in her life, even
Right.
at the same time her cognitive capacities were declining.
Right. Wow. Well, that's where we're going to have to leave it today. And that note, very positive one. I thank you for that. So, folks, once again, if you want to listen to the show, you can go to voice, Bold Brave TV and look for 45 Forward. You can also listen to it as a podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, other platforms, wherever you listen to your podcast. I want to thank Jim and Carol for a terrific show. Thank you so much. I've learned a lot. I hope our audience has as well. I want to thank my engineer, Alex, for as part of his terrific team, helped me through every show. And now I just want to give a short plug for next week. Join me next Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. I'll be talking to Rob Esposito. He's the founder of Relocators and the author of a new book, Nobody Move Without Reading This, which addresses the stresses and challenges and strategies of moving through life's many transitions. So until then, folks, keep moving forward, 45 forward.
This has been 45 Forward with host Ron Roel. Tune in each week as Ron tackles the many aspects of health, finance, family and friends, housing, work, and personal pursuits, all as part of an integrated plan and to take charge of your unretiring life during these uncertain times. Wednesdays, 7 p.m. Eastern on the Bold Brave TV network, powered by B2 Studios.